I opened a credit card to help cover my dad's medical bills, thinking I was just doing the right thing for family. 2 months later, I saw images and video of my sister's kids arriving at their birthday party in a helicopter, surrounded by fireworks and luxury decorations. When I asked who paid for it, she smiled and said, "You did, big brother." I thought she was joking, until my mom walked in, pulled out an envelope from the bank, and handed me my own credit card. Never thought helping family would lead to this. 6 months ago, Dad collapsed at work. Heart attack, triple bypass surgery. The kind of medical emergency that drains savings accounts and forces families to make impossible choices. Mom called me crying that first night in the ICU, her voice breaking as she explained their insurance would only cover 60%. The remaining bills would run somewhere north of $80,000. I didn't hesitate. I was the oldest, the one with decent credit and a stable job in IT consulting. My sister had 3 kids and a husband who worked construction, their finances always tight. My younger brother was still in graduate school, drowning in student loans. This fell on me, and I accepted it without complaint. The credit card application went through in 48 hours. Premium medical financing, they called it. $25,000 limit, with a promotional interest rate for the first year. I handed the card directly to Mom at the hospital, told her to use it for whatever Dad needed. Co-pays, medications, follow-up appointments, physical therapy. Whatever kept him alive and recovering. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, thanking me over and over. Dad squeezed my hand from his hospital bed, too weak to speak, but his eyes said everything. My sister sent a long text message about what an amazing brother I was. Even my brother called, rare for him, expressing gratitude that I could step up when he couldn't. I felt good about it, righteous even. This was what family did. You sacrificed. You carried the weight, so others didn't have to. The first statement arrived 4 weeks later. $12,000 charged. Higher than I expected, but medical costs were insane. I made the minimum payment, and figured the charges would taper off as Dad's immediate crisis period ended. The second statement showed another $8,000. I called Mom to ask about it, and she assured me everything was Dad-related. More specialists, some equipment he needed at home, prescriptions. Month 3 brought the card to its limit. $25,000 maxed out. I applied for an increase, got approved for $35,000 and kept going. The interest rate jumped after the promotional period. But what choice did I have? Dad's health came first. Then came last Saturday. I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break, when the video started appearing. My sister's Instagram story. My nephew's 8th birthday party. Except this wasn't the usual backyard gathering with a cake and some balloons. The first clip showed a helicopter descending into what looked like a massive estate property. Professional fireworks exploded in broad daylight. The next video panned across tables laden with catered food, an ice sculpture centerpiece, and what appeared to be a live band. My niece, 6 years old, was wearing a designer dress I recognized from a luxury children's boutique. Price tag probably ran 4 figures. My nephew stood grinning next to a custom birthday cake that must have been 5 feet tall, shaped like a castle with actual working lights in the windows. I sat there staring at my phone, my sandwich forgotten. The party had easily 50 guests. There were professional photographers, a videographer, party favors and designer gift bags. One shot showed my brother-in-law laughing with friends, mixed to what I was pretty sure was a rented exotic car display. The whole thing probably cost more than most weddings. I felt sick. My sister's family could barely afford their mortgage last time we talked. She'd mentioned possibly having to pull the kids from their private school due to costs. Now they were throwing a party that belonged on some celebrity gossip site. I called her that evening. Asked about the party, keeping my tone casual. She gushed about how amazing it was, how the kids would never forget it. I asked, trying to sound light, who managed to pay for something that extravagant? She laughed. Actually laughed. Then said the words that made my blood turn cold. You did, big brother. Thanks for being so generous. I told myself I misheard. Told myself it was a joke and poor taste. She must have meant I'd inspired them to splurge a little, or maybe she was being metaphorical about family support. But something in her tone, a smugness I'd never heard before, made my stomach knot. I pushed back, said, that didn't make sense. She just giggled and said we'd talk about it later. Then hung up claiming the kids needed her. I couldn't sleep that night, kept replaying the videos, calculating rough costs in my head. Helicopter rental, several thousand, venue, probably 10 grand minimum for something that size, catering for 50+ people, another few thousand. The entertainment, decorations, photographer, party favors, that insane cake. Even being conservative, the party had to cost at least $30,000. right around what I'd put on the credit card for Dad's medical bills. Sunday morning, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. Mom answered the door looking surprised but happy to see me. We made small talk while she fixed coffee. I asked about Dad's recovery, and she said he was doing wonderfully, almost back to his old self. He was out playing golf with friends actually. Golf. Something twisted in my chest. 2 months ago, he'd been in a hospital bed, unable to walk to the bathroom alone. Now he was well enough for 18 holes. I steered the conversation to finances, asked how they were managing with all the medical expenses. Mom waved it off, said they'd been blessed with good insurance and community support. The bills hadn't been nearly as bad as they'd feared. I asked directly about the credit card. How much had actually gone toward Dad's medical care? Mom's face changed, the warmth drained from her expression, replaced by something guarded and uncomfortable. She asked why I was asking. What did it matter as long as Dad was healthy? I explained I'd seen my sister's party, explained the timing seemed suspicious, explained I needed to know exactly where my money went. She stood up and left the room without a word. I heard her rummaging in her bedroom. When she returned, she was holding a manila envelope from the bank. She set it on the table between us and slid it toward me. Inside was my credit card, the one I'd given her for Dad's emergency medical expenses, along with detailed statements. I went through them line by line, while Mom watched silently. The charges made my hands shake. Luxury resort vacation for my sister's family, $8,000. Designer furniture for my brother's new apartment, $4,000. Mom's kitchen renovation, $9,000. New landscaping for my parents' yard, $3,000. Payment to a private school, my sister's kids' tuition, $6,000. The actual medical charges totaled maybe $8,000 across all 3 statements. Everything else, the vast majority of the debt I'd taken on, had been used to fund my family's lifestyle upgrades and luxuries. I asked Mom why. Why would she do this? Why would she lie to me? She said I'd offered to help family, and this was helping. My sister's kids deserved nice things. My brother needed furniture after his breakup. She and Dad had wanted to update their kitchen for years. The medical bills got paid, didn't they? So what was the problem? I told her the problem was fraud. The problem was I'd been manipulated. The problem was I was now $35,000 in debt, with a 23% interest rate, because they'd all decided to treat me like a personal bank account. Mom said I was being selfish. That family shared resources. That I made good money and should be happy to help my siblings and parents improve their lives. After everything they'd done raising me, this was the least I could do. I left without another word, drove home in a daze, spent the rest of Sunday staring at those statements, watching my entire understanding of my family crumble. Monday morning I called the credit card company, asked about fraud protection. They said since I'd voluntarily given the card to my mother, I was legally responsible for all charges. My only recourse was small claims court against family members. And even then, proving I didn't authorize the spending would be nearly impossible, since I'd explicitly told Mom to use the card for family needs. I was trapped, legally bound to debt they'd created, while I thought I was saving my father's life. Update 1. The anger took 3 days to fully set in. The kind that sits in your chest like hot coal, burning through any remaining goodwill or familial obligation. I'd spent 72 hours reviewing my options, consulting with a lawyer friend, and documenting everything. The conclusion was clear. Legally, I had almost no recourse. Morally, I had every right to burn their world down. I started with research. If my family wanted to treat relationships like business transactions, I'd oblige them with the same cold professionalism. First, I pulled my sister's social media history. Downloaded every post, every story, every image from the past 6 months. The evidence was staggering. Beyond the birthday party, there were posts about their weekend trip to a luxury spa resort. Pictures of her husband's new gaming setup, easily $3,000 worth of equipment. Videos of her showing off a designer handbag collection. All of it time-stamped to when they supposedly couldn't afford basic expenses. I contacted my brother. We met for coffee, and I asked him directly about the furniture charges. He had the decency to look embarrassed at least. Admitted Mom had offered to help him furnish his new place after his divorce. Said she had money set aside for family support. He claimed he didn't know it was coming from my credit card until recently. I asked if he'd be willing to pay me back, now that he knew. But he was barely making ends meet on a graduate assistant's stipend. Maybe $50 a month. At that rate, it would take him 7 years to reimburse his portion. I told him to keep his money. I had other plans. My parents were hosting their usual Sunday dinner that week. They'd sent a family text inviting everyone, including me, as if nothing had happened. Mom added that she was making my favorite pot roast, complete with a smiley face emoji. The audacity was almost impressive. I responded that I'd be there, and asked if I could bring a guest. Mom said, of course, the more the merrier. I spent the week preparing, made spreadsheets, printed documents, compiled evidence. By Sunday, I had a presentation that would make my corporate clients proud. I arrived at my parents' house with a banker's box and a laptop. Mom looked puzzled when she saw me carrying everything in, but she just smiled and said dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. My sister and her family were already there, kids running around the backyard. My brother showed up shortly after. We all sat down at the extended dining table. Dad said grace, thanking God for family and blessings. I almost laughed at the irony. I waited until everyone had fruit on their plates. Then I stood up, opened my laptop, and connected it to their TV using the HDMI cable I'd brought. My sister asked what I was doing. I told her I wanted to share a family presentation, something I'd been working on. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was titled Financial Transparency Initiative, with the family name beneath it. Dad told me this wasn't the time. Mom said we should just enjoy dinner. I ignored them both and clicked to the next slide. It showed the credit card statements in large so every charge was visible. I walked them through it line by line, read each expense aloud, like I was presenting quarterly earnings. The vacation, the furniture, the kitchen renovation, the landscaping, the private school tuition, the birthday party. My sister's face went pale. Her husband started to stand up, but I told him to sit down. I wasn't done. Next slide showed screenshots from my sister's social media, the helicopter video playing on loop, images of designer clothes and luxury items, timestamps and estimated costs labeled on each one. I explained how I'd calculated the party expenses, showing my methodology like a financial audit. My brother was staring at his plate. Mom had tears in her eyes. Dad's jaw was clenched tight. I moved to the next section. Legal obligations and consequences, explaining that while I couldn't force them to pay through legal channels without destroying what remained of our relationships, I wanted them to understand the position they'd put me in. I displayed my monthly credit card payments, showed how the interest was compounding, projected out how long it would take me to pay off their spending at my current rate, assuming I charged nothing else. 14 years, nearly 15, if the interest rate increased, which it likely would. I'd be almost 50 years old before I cleared debt they'd accumulated in 3 months of selfish spending. The room was silent, except for my niece asking her mom why everyone looked mad. My sister told her to go play in the other room, sensing the tension. Final slide, the ultimatum. I gave them 2 options. Option 1, they could all collectively reimburse me. I'd accept a payment plan, properly documented and legally binding. My sister and her husband would cover the party and vacation costs. Mom and Dad would handle the renovation and landscaping. My brother's furniture debt could be folded into the family plan. I wanted it in writing, notarized, with a schedule of monthly payments. I'd pursue legal action, regardless of family ties. Option 2, I'd consider the debt a gift. But in exchange, they would all sign a family agreement acknowledging what they'd done and agreeing to cut me out of any future financial requests or expectations. No borrowing money, no co-signing loans, no emergency funds. They'd also agree to never claim I owed them anything for my upbringing or family support. Essentially, they could keep the money, but our relationships would be permanently transactional, rather than familial. I gave them 1 week to decide. Then I closed the laptop, packed up my box, and left my pot roast untouched on the table. Update 2. The week of silence was brutal. No calls, no texts, nothing from any of them. I'd expected anger, arguments, maybe even apologetic attempts at negotiation. Instead, I got complete radio silence, which somehow felt worse. I threw myself into work, picking up extra projects to offset the credit card payments, started selling things I didn't need, canceled subscriptions, cut my budget to bare essentials. Every dollar went toward that debt, and every payment felt like swallowing glass, while knowing they were living comfortably on my dime. 6 days after the dinner, my brother broke the silence. He texted asking if we could meet in person, said he'd been thinking a lot about everything. We met at a coffee shop near his campus. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept properly in days. He started by apologizing, really apologizing. Not the half-hearted sorry he'd offered before. Said he'd been selfish and willfully blind to where the money was coming from. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a check for $4,000. His entire savings account, wiped out. I told him this wasn't what I wanted, that the ultimatum was about accountability, not destroying him financially. He said he couldn't live with himself, knowing he'd contributed to this. The furniture meant nothing compared to his relationship with his brother. He'd rather sleep on an air mattress with a clear conscience. I took the check but told him I'd hold on to it for now. Asked what he knew about the rest of the family's response. He told me mom and dad were furious, felt I'd publicly humiliated them in their own home. They'd been calling my actions abusive and manipulative, claiming I'd traumatized the grandkids by creating such a tense scene. Dad had apparently said I was dead to him until I apologized. My sister was worse. She'd been rallying other family members, painting me as greedy and controlling, told our aunts and uncles that I was demanding they pay back a gift I'd freely given. Several relatives had reached out to my brother asking what was wrong with me, why I was tearing the family apart over money. The narrative had shifted. Somehow, I'd become the villain. I asked if anyone was actually considering the payment plan. He shook his head. They'd all decided on option 2, but with modifications. They wanted me to forgive the debt entirely, attend family therapy to address my trust issues, and agree never to bring this up again. They were negotiating from a position they didn't hold, trying to rewrite the terms to avoid any consequences. I thanked my brother for his honesty and the check. Told him to be prepared for things to get worse before they got better. That night I made a decision. If they wanted to play the public opinion game, I'd participate on my terms. I created a detailed blog post, didn't use anyone's names, kept it anonymous, but laid out the entire situation chronologically. The emergency call about Dad's heart attack, the credit card, the discovery, the confrontation, their refusal to take accountability. I included redacted screenshots of the statements, showing the charges with personal information blurred out. I posted it to several personal finance forums and a few family dynamics subreddits. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of comments offering support, sharing similar stories, validating that I wasn't crazy or cruel. Several people pointed out that what my family did was financial abuse, a term I'd been hesitant to use, but recognized as accurate. A few commenters suggested I reach out to the credit card company again, with the documented evidence that the card was used fraudulently against my stated intentions. One person who claimed to work in credit card fraud mentioned that the company might be more receptive if I could prove the charges were made without my knowledge, for non-emergency purposes. I spent the next day gathering evidence. Saved all the initial text messages from Mom about Dad's medical emergency. Found the email I'd sent her with the card, explicitly stating it was for Dad's healthcare expenses only. Screenshot the conversations where I'd asked about charges and been told they were medical related. I called the credit card company and asked to speak with their fraud department. This time, I had documentation. I explained that I'd provided the card for specific medical expenses, had been lied to about the nature of the charges, and could prove the cardholder had used it for purposes I'd never authorized. The representative was sympathetic, but explained it was complicated, since I'd voluntarily given the card to a family member. She noted several charges for what she said I'd requested an investigation into unauthorized use. They couldn't reverse all the charges, but they'd review the account. Potential outcomes included flagging it as disputed, which could impact my credit, but might give me grounds for a lawsuit, or identifying specific charges that clearly fell outside any reasonable interpretation of medical expenses. The investigation would take 4 to 6 weeks. I filed a police report next. Didn't press charges, just documented the situation officially. The officer taking the report was older, probably a father himself, and he looked genuinely sad as I explained everything. He told me he saw this type of family financial abuse more often than people realized. The report wouldn't lead to prosecution without me pushing for it, but it created an official record. With all of this in motion, I sent a final email to my family. I explained that I'd initiated a fraud investigation with the credit card company and filed a police report. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I needed to protect myself legally and financially. I reiterated the 2 options, emphasizing that the window for choosing was closing. If they wanted to handle this within the family, now was the time. Once the investigation concluded and legal processes began, the decision would be out of my hands. Mom, Dad, my sister, her husband, my brother. My sister's husband called me within an hour, furious. Threatened me. Said I was destroying my niece and nephew's lives over money. Said I'd regret this when I was old and alone because I'd burned every family bridge. I let him vent. Then calmly explained that his children's lives were being destroyed by their parents' choices, not mine. I hadn't rented a helicopter for an 8-year-old's birthday party while claiming poverty. I hadn't stolen from family and then played victim when caught. He hung up on me. Mom sent a long text message about how disappointed she was, how she'd raised me better than this, how Dad's heart condition was worsening from the stress I was causing. How could I be so cruel to my own father? I replied with a single line. Dad was well enough for golf 3 weeks ago. Don't use his health to manipulate me again. My sister posted a vague status on social media about toxic people who abandon family and how blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Several relatives liked it. A few commented with supportive messages for her. I didn't respond publicly, Instead, I sent a blog post link to a few cousins I trusted. Let them draw their own conclusions. The fractures were spreading, exactly as I'd known they would. But I was past caring about preserving relationships that had only ever been one-sided. Update 3. The credit card company's investigation took 5 weeks. During that time, I existed in a strange limbo. I'd effectively cut contact with my parents and sister. My brother and I texted occasionally, carefully avoiding the subject. Extended family had mostly chosen sides, and I wasn't surprised to find myself in the minority. The narrative my sister had crafted was compelling to people who didn't know the details. Successful older brother demands poor young family pay back help he'd offered during a medical emergency. She'd conveniently omitted the lies, the fraud, the helicopter birthday party funded with stolen credit. I stopped trying to defend myself to relatives who reached out with concern or criticism. Either they'd believe me or they wouldn't. I was tired of explaining, justifying, proving my reality to people who'd already decided I was the problem. Work became my refuge. I took on a major client project that required 60-hour weeks. The exhaustion was almost welcome. Gave me an excuse to fall into bed too tired to think about the wreckage of my family relationships. Then, the letter arrived from the credit card company. They'd completed their investigation. After reviewing the evidence I provided, the documented communications about the card's intended purpose, and the nature of the charges, they were willing to offer a settlement. They'd reclassify roughly $18,000 worth of charges as disputed. This wouldn't erase the debt, but it would be flagged on the account as unauthorized use, which would impact how it was reported to credit bureaus. More importantly, it gave me legal standing. The letter included documentation I could use if I chose to pursue civil action against the individuals who'd made the unauthorized charges. I sat with that letter for 2 days, weighing options. The nuclear option would be suing my family in civil court. The evidence was solid. I'd likely win judgments against my mother, my sister, and her husband at minimum. Could potentially put liens on their property, garnish wages, force real financial consequences. But lawsuits are public record. It would make everything official, permanent, impossible to ever repair. My niece and nephew would grow up knowing their uncles sued their parents. Family gatherings for generations would be marked by this rift. I drafted the lawsuit paperwork, had my lawyer friend review it, got it ready to file. Then I made one last attempt at resolution. I sent a certified letter to each family member involved, included copies of the credit card company's findings. Explained that I had legal standing now, that this wasn't just a family dispute anymore, but documented fraud. Gave them one final chance to make this right before I filed. The terms were simple. Full repayment plan, properly documented, or I'd pursue legal action. No more negotiations, no more modifications. Accept accountability, or face court. My brother called immediately, said he supported whatever I decided to do. His check was still good if I wanted to deposit it. Silence from everyone else for 3 days. Then Dad called. He sounded old on the phone, tired. Asked if we could meet in person, just the two of us. Said some things needed to be said face to face. I met him at a park near their house. He was waiting on a bench, looking smaller somehow than the strong father I'd grown up with. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a while, before he started talking. He told me he'd been wrong. Not just about the credit card, but about enabling Mom and my sister for years. He'd watched them spend beyond their means, justify every luxury as deserved, treat my success as a family resource rather than my personal achievement. He'd said nothing, because keeping peace was easier than confronting problems. The heart attack had scared him, made him realize how little time might be left. But instead of using that revelation to build genuine connections, they'd exploited it, used his health crisis to manipulate me into funding their lifestyle. He was ashamed, not just of what they'd done, but of his own cowardice in allowing it. I asked why he was telling me this now. He said because the lawsuit would destroy what little remained of our family. But I'd be justified in filing it. He wouldn't blame me, wouldn't fight it, would testify truthfully about what happened if it came to that. But he wanted to offer an alternative. He and Mom would sell their house. They'd been planning to downsize eventually anyway. The house had appreciated significantly, enough equity to pay off my credit card debt entirely, and still leave them money for a smaller place. My sister and her husband would be on their own. He wouldn't enable them anymore. It wasn't the accountability I demanded. It was their accountability, taking responsibility for their part in this. I asked about Mom, if she agreed to this. He said she didn't have a choice. The house was in both their names, but he'd made the decision. She could be angry with him instead of me. I asked what he wanted in return. He said nothing. No reconciliation required. No expectation that this would fix our relationship. Just a chance to do the right thing before he died, whether that was next year or in 20 years. We sat there watching ducks on the pond, while I processed this. Part of me wanted to refuse, to push forward with the lawsuit, out of pure principle. They traumatized me, stolen from me, turned family against me. They deserved legal consequences. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted and hurt and desperately wanted this nightmare to end, saw the lifeline. I told Dad I'd think about it. He nodded, stood up slowly, and hugged me, first real hug we'd shared since before the heart attack. He whispered that he loved me and was sorry, then walked back to his car. I stayed on that bench until sunset, trying to figure out what justice actually looked like. The house sold in 3 weeks. The market was hot, and they accepted the first solid offer. Mom was furious, according to my brother. She cried, screamed, accused Dad of destroying their retirement over my vindictiveness. The closing was handled entirely through lawyers. I didn't attend. The check was delivered via certified mail, enough to pay off the entire credit card balance plus cover the legal fees I'd accumulated. I deposited it. Paid off the card. Closed the account. For the first time in 7 months, I was debt-free. My sister sent a scathing email. Called me manipulative, cruel, blamed me for destroying our parents' stability in their old age. Said her kids asked why Grandma and Grandpa had to move, and she had to explain that their uncle cared more about money than family. I didn't respond. Mom sent nothing. Complete silence that spoke volumes. My brother came over the night after everything cleared. We ordered pizza and didn't talk about any of it. Just watched basketball and existed in each other's presence like we used to before everything imploded. As he was leaving, he told me Dad had asked him to pass along a message. The new house had a guest room if I ever wanted to visit. No pressure, no expectations. Just an open door if I ever wanted to walk through it. I haven't visited, haven't called, haven't reached out to Mom or my sister, but I haven't filed a lawsuit either. Processing the betrayal and figuring out what healthy boundaries look like. My therapist says I'm experiencing complicated grief, mourning the family I thought I had, while learning to accept the reality of what it actually was. Some days I'm angry, some days I'm sad, some days I feel nothing at all. My credit score has recovered. I've started saving aggressively, building an emergency fund, so I'll never be financially vulnerable again. I've made it clear to the few family members I still talk to that I won't be attending major gatherings for the foreseeable future. My niece's 9th birthday passed last month. No helicopter this time, from what I heard. Just a modest party at their house. I didn't send a gift. People ask if I regret how I handled it. If I wish I'd just let it go, forgiven the debt, preserved the relationships. The honest answer is, I don't know yet. What I do know is that I'm no longer carrying weight that isn't mine. I'm not responsible for their choices, their consequences, or their comfort. I'm not the family bank account, or the solution to problems they created. I'm just a man who tried to help his father, and learned a devastating lesson about who his family really was. Maybe someday that open door at Dad's new house will feel like something I can walk through. Maybe Mom will acknowledge what happened. Maybe my sister will realize the cost of her choices. Or maybe none of that will happen, and I'll build a chosen family of people who don't confuse love with exploitation. Either way, I'm finally free.